Thank you very much for the warm welcome, and thank you, Antonio, for the over-the-top introduction. It's a great way to begin. I'm delighted to be in Madrid. This is my first visit, and what I want to talk with you about today, I won't make it too long, is focus on what people are calling government 2.0, coming from social networking. Some of the opportunities, some of the challenges, and the key issue will be this transition from the election of Obama. This is going to be a pretty much U.S.-based talk, but how that the innovations in the campaign work their way into the election, into the government. And then we talk maybe a little bit about some of the opportunities and challenges. I see what's going on here. All right. To be fair, Howard Dean had the first interactive campaign website that we know about. I don't know why this is happening. But this website that's familiar to Americans who were going to it during the campaign is really the first time that you see this kind of presidential campaign. You might have used these in Europe, but in the U.S. this was new for us. And so you see opportunities here. I don't know if you can read them, to volunteer. Would you like to knock on doors? In the U.S., we send people around, knock on doors, please vote for Obama. Make calls. Do you want to find events? Do you want to log into the other part of the website? And of course, fundraising. So donate and get a gift, a T-shirt or a bumper sticker or something. And then this is key as well. You put in your zip code, and they're making a database geographically fairly precise of who has an interest. So they will come and find you if you give them your information. Here are just some of the places where you would have found the Obama campaign: Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. And by contrast, you could see the John McCain website, which was a bit dark, black and white. We know what the outcome was. And then his Facebook site with a very standard formal picture. So they're using the new medium, but projecting a very traditional look. And of course, they're trying to reach conservatives. They're trying to reach maybe some younger people as well. So they had maybe a message problem. So some of the numbers, I hope you can see these. I know it's late Friday afternoon, so to give you lots of numbers doesn't seem quite fair. But they're important numbers. We know that Obama won with 52.5% of the popular vote. We also have electoral votes, 364 in his case. And here are some of the connection numbers. 13 million people on the email list. And those people would have received 7,000 variations of more than 1 billion emails sent out. So this isn't just a website. They're pushing information out in lots of customized ways. Social networking sites, 5 million friends, 15 different websites, social networking sites, almost 3 million supporters on Facebook, friends on MySpace, nearly 1 million. The first figures are early in the campaign, spring. The figures in parentheses are by the end of the campaign when he's being elected, so you can see some growth as well. Followers on Twitter. Many people know about the campaign donations, 600 million in contributions. There were 300 million donors online. And the interesting thing here is 6.5 million times that people donated. So you might click and donate $10, $20, some small amount, and then a month or so later, probably because they emailed and said, we're having the battle of our lives. We need to make an ad. We're going to need money for the ad. Please send us $10, in the next 24 hours. And you say, sure, I can send, another $10. Personal phone calls during the last days of the campaign, very targeted. We need you to go to this neighborhood, knock on doors. So this is not just a website. This is a whole strategy, a very well-managed campaign. The myBarackObama.com was the central website. I don't know if you knew that the co-founder of Facebook was intimately involved with the internet-based part of the campaign. Chris Hughes made an enormous difference. 1.5 million accounts. You could go to this website, set up your own account, set your own fundraising goals, set your own goals to run your own little part of the campaign. The amount of both direction and autonomy, empowerment that they gave to volunteers was unprecedented. There has been no other campaign where you simply allowed volunteers to make their own smaller fundraising strategies, go and do their own fundraising, blog posts, people setting up their own volunteer groups, or their own fundraising sites. This morphs into the Organizing for America website after the campaign. One of the questions was, we organized all these people to get him elected. Can't we keep this going in some way to shape the new government? And so we're in this experiment in the U.S. right now on how we continue to use this. They reached out to specific communities as well. These are just some of the online communities. So instead of having one website or just being on Facebook, they're specifically pushing into various communities to build relationships, to build familiarity. The social networking. They were on LinkedIn, 500 connections. Flickr. The pictures, the photos, the sense that you knew Obama and that you knew his family and his lovely children was greatly enhanced. And of course, completely orchestrated by having very nice photos, making you feel that you know the family. One of the objectives here, of course, is that people had to become comfortable with an African-American family who might be in the White House, something new for the United States. And this served a very important purpose of introducing the family and making you feel like you really knew who they were, how they had fun, how they celebrated their holidays, where they went on vacation. They were in Second Life. I don't know if you know this. Online virtual reality world. Text messaging sent out with very clear directions to people. This is what we need you to do. This is how we need you to do it. They were quite effective in terms of email as well. If the McCain campaign began a story, an attack, they would meet the attack almost immediately and with great force through emails, through YouTube, through every communication device they could manage. So we're really fighting this battle in a very concerted way. The ability to get online and to use advertising was also quite important. And as you can see, a great deal of money was spent, almost $300 million in television advertising. between January of the election to up to the day of voting, greatly outspent the McGain campaign. Online advertising alone is 8 million, 3 million on Google. They're pretty substantial amounts of money. The use of YouTube was fairly new. In a meeting today, we were joking about the head of the Conservative Party in the UK, David Cameron, who started making these YouTubes where he's standing at his kitchen sink or standing in his bathroom brushing his teeth, talking to his constituents to sort of emphasize the informality of the communication. And there were lots of joke YouTubes to parody these. This obviously is a very formal one. Most of these, I would say all of these YouTubes were pretty formal. But this is something new, a new way of getting to know a candidate and getting the message out. These numbers are not only new, but they are, I think, stunning. They made almost 2,000 videos, official videos. These are not things that people took and then uploaded. If you took all the hours, 14.5 million hours of people watching these videos, videos watched more than 80 million times. Obama's speech on race, I don't know how closely you followed this election. There was a point in time where actually the Clintons were attacking him in a way that was using race. There was a problem with a minister in Chicago who had made inflammatory statements about America, about white people. This was Obama's old church. He decided that he would address this explicitly. He gave a very good speech, almost an hour long, a quite important speech on race. Almost 7 million people watched that speech on YouTube. You could watch it on TV, but so there was an enormous attention on that speech, and that was a turning point in which he was able to put aside some very serious objections that had come up. User-generated videos, almost 500,000 of them. Joe Trippi, who is a longtime political manager in the U.S., felt that videos were more effective than television. Why? Because people could download them. You could watch them when you wanted to. If you wanted to watch it again, you could watch it again. You could watch it as many times as you want. You could send it to friends. You could embed it in your emails. So people had the ability to share and to control these videos in a way that they couldn't control with television. And of course, something on television might be edited down, might be abbreviated. The videos play at full length. 14.5 million hours on television would cost $47 million. All of this on YouTube costs absolutely nothing. So it's an extraordinary way to communicate and to get power in the campaign for no money. I mentioned the management of the volunteers and of the campaign itself. There are two modes here. One, the second bullet, self-organizing networks. People had a lot of autonomy to shape the way they wanted to participate. At the same time, the campaign is aware of everyone by their zip code, by their information, where they are, where the independent voters are, where the likely voters are, where interest is coming from, where they felt they needed more activity. So they're deploying people strategically all throughout the campaign to, for these campaigns, you take a map and you literally go block by block across the entire country, figuring out where you have volunteers, where you need coverage, where you want to knock on doors, and that's really the only way to have a successful campaign. So no one should think that because they're online that they didn't need to do that kind of fine-grained, labor-intensive, precinct by precinct, block by block campaigning. They did, and they used the internet and web as tools to help them do it in a very effective way. I mentioned asking people to set fundraising goals. One way to motivate people is these little sort of contests or objectives that you set for them. So they would constantly be saying, can you call 5 people this week? And you think, well, of course I can call 5 people. That's easy. So you tell people what you want them to do, right? Basic management, giving people feedback. Around the time that Obama was going to select who the vice presidential candidate would be, they decided again to create some excitement, suspense. You could sign up to get a text message, and you would be among the first to learn. Before he had the newspaper announcement, the television announcement, he would text the people following the campaign. So it's a nice way to jump over newspapers, television, go directly to the people who are trying to help you get elected. And almost 3 million people signed up to get that. During the latter part of the campaign, they developed an app for the iPhone that if you allowed them to, it would just take your address book, put it into their contact list, look for people who were in a precinct where they didn't feel they had the support that they needed, and then ask you to call those people. So a very, very precise and strategic use of people's friendship networks to boost support. So you may like all of this, you may not like it, you may think, is this the way we want campaigns to run? The message here is just to report this is what was done. And because it worked so well, it's likely to be repeated. And it's likely to find its way to other countries as well, if it hasn't already. The McCain campaign, I know, it's unfair. The Obama campaign had 2 times the website traffic. I'm surprised, actually, it wasn't more. Quadrupled the YouTube viewers. Again, I'm surprised it wasn't more. 5 times the Facebook friends, 10 times the online staff. And again, you see, this is not just putting stuff on the web. This is having a very expert staff, top people in the social networking business who really know how to get the most functionality out of these tools and the result. What we don't know is given, I'll just say it, given that so many people were so angry at the Bush administration, if none of this had happened, we can't go back and do the experiment. Would he have won? If he would have won, would it have been the same margin? We don't know, so we can't know exactly what role these played in a scientific way, but I think we can be pretty sure that they played an important role. So what did we have? Clear goals in terms of management, clear planning. This is not just friendship networks will self-organize to get someone elected. There's very basic, standard, traditional management with strategic use of these tools. People were offered multiple points of entry. There were loads of ways that someone could get involved. They could email friends to ask for support. They could take an article or a YouTube and email it to people. They could call people. They could show up at events. They could knock on doors. They could give money. They could write letters. And they just kept presenting these opportunities, knowing that some people, many people, would pick up on many of them. As I mentioned before, on the McCain campaign, although there's use of the web, there was no ability for users or volunteers in that campaign to self-organize or to form their own plans. That kind of interactivity wasn't there. And again, it's not entirely new to the Obama campaign. So what did they inherit? They get elected. They come into a bureaucracy in 2008. Well, this was already going on. And what this means is a set of cross-agency initiatives, building a horizontal government, sharing databases, sharing processes across agencies. What you see here are 25 different projects. For example, take all the different ministries in the federal government that manage asset sales. There are probably 15 of them or more, all using different processes, all using different forms, not sharing information with one another. The idea was to consolidate this and standardize it so that you could get more efficiency and reduce redundancies. Tax and wage reporting. Different companies, different entities need to report to different parts of the government. They wanted to simplify those. Many, many different training programs. What was being built here is maybe a little bit easier to see on this slide, an enterprise approach. The column heads across the top. I know they're all acronyms. We won't read them. Those are all the different ministries, or as we call them, agencies in the government. And then if you studied re-engineering or business process redesign, we have a number of fairly standard functions and some non-standard functions. So you map the entire government based on who does what in these functions, and you say the impetus for this was, how many different IT systems do we have to handle grants? Are we really going to procure and buy and maintain and upgrade all of these different systems that work in slightly different ways but that do pretty much the same thing? Why should the taxpayer pay for these things? And why should we have this kind of complexity for taxpayers and corporations that need to interact with grants? So for the first time, you're taking the whole government and trying to map it in terms of its business processes. This began probably about 1995, 96, so this was a long process. This is what they inherit. And I'm pointing it out because it's very, very different from social networking, government 2.0, but not everything comes from citizen involvement in government. You need to think about how the institution works and what's getting done and how to modernize that as well. It's Friday afternoon, so the point of this slide is that there are a long series of developments starting in the early 90s. We needed to develop CIO positions. When Obama arrives, he develops a CTO, or Chief Technology Officer position. We needed to develop management for these cross-agency projects. There was no way to think of who would have jurisdiction over that, or who a cross-agency project would be accountable to. Those layers and that kind of organization didn't exist, and it had to be created. Lots of legislation had to be passed. Digital signatures, allowing agencies to share a budget for a cross-agency project, figuring out who would be in charge. In our government, it's the Office of Management and Budget that we placed over all of this. So they arrive at the White House. You saw a little bit of what they were finding. Another important point about that is even though many people might not have been happy with the Bush administration, it was really civil servants who were building the enterprise view of government. So by that point, the permanent civil servants already had this idea of how to improve how their agencies would perform. And almost regardless of who the president was or who was in the White House, they could continue on this path. So it was a very significant set of developments. The Obama administration arrives just a little over a year ago, and almost immediately develops the Open Government Initiative. The focus is on three things: transparency, participation, and collaboration. Make broadband internet access available. We're still working on that. We have a long way to go. Drive growth, drive economic growth by building an information infrastructure for the 21st century. We have a long way to go on that in the U.S. as well. Make investments in science and science education. Move toward what they call unprecedented openness. As much data, as much information as can be available to the public should be made available in an easy to download, easy to find form. These last points, by the way, are useful, I think, for any government coming out of the economic crisis, trying to build a knowledge economy and information society. These investments, what isn't up there, well, education, investments in R&D, investments in innovation, investments in infrastructure for the 21st century are critical. In the White House, this is our CIO, Vivek Kundra, our Chief Technology Officer, Deepak Chopra, and the website used in the campaign sort of morphs into websites, blogs, a whole array of tools for governance itself. Campaign mode is intense, it's exciting, it has a short time span. They needed something else. One of the things that they did from the start, I don't know if you can read this, it's phase one brainstorm. They actually invited people to send in their ideas. What should the priorities for the government, for the administration be? Unfortunately, this didn't work very well. Most of the ideas were to legalize marijuana, and probably second high up on the list was Obama really American, and does he have a birth certificate? So sometimes when you open the floodgates, you don't exactly get what you want. So they've learned a lot from that experience of unprecedented openness, and I think they're learning a lot about the very harsh realities of politics, where not everybody wants to collaborate all the time. Transparency, build transparency to foster greater accountability. If everyone can see the budget numbers, how things are being spent, maybe things will be a little bit more efficient. Ask people to participate in their government. It's not clear yet how this is going, quite frankly. It's one thing to ask for participation. It's another thing to get useful advice and collaboration. As you know, Obama is the collaboration president, and we're also seeing how that's going to go, whether he just needs to use some raw power. But the idea here is that people all over the country have ideas. We want good ideas to find their way to the government, and we want to, open the floodgates. The issue in Washington itself is, how do you find the good ideas? How do you identify them? How do you sift through all the bad ideas? And what do you do with these ideas, especially if you don't have any money? So these might work very well in a growth environment. They take on a different meaning in a cutback environment. One of the great things that the government has done, this is one of the federal websites called data.gov, is the effort to start to put on one website, or to reach through one website, it's actually a portal, all of the government's data. I'm not going to click into it, but what you can see over here is that to the extent possible, you can get things in XML. You can get them in different forms. There are various tools for analyzing the data. We have an awful lot of mapping data, weather maps, climate maps, real estate maps, environmental maps, and that very rich geocoded data is available as well. The idea here is that people could use this data to help solve some problems and to know what their government has. Another very important website is called apps.gov, and these are lots of apps. I wanted to say almost 100. I should go back and count them. They're changing. They're being added to all the time that government officials can just download. So there are lots of things that they, in terms of apps, that they would have competed and that they would have had procured and paid for, that they could simply download because the government already owns them. Someone's already bought them. Some agency has already bought it. So you don't need to keep buying it for every agency. This has been a huge simplification and a lot of economic benefit. Lots of other innovations, blogs, etc., all over the government. Defense Department looking for new ideas, Office of Science and Technology Policy blog, an idea factory. We have a business.gov website to help small businesses get started and to flourish. So where do we go? This is the social sciencey part, and it's Friday afternoon, so we do it quickly. If you're looking at collaboration across actors, you need to look at least 3 levels: individual levels, operational interoperability and points of complementarity, and then institutional factors. Who is allowed to collaborate on what laws pertain, what kind of budget do you have for the activity. And you can see across these projects that you can look at these various factors. And I think these are useful for managers as well as a sort of checklist to see where you might be having problems or where and why you were successful in a collaborative activity. I think some of Government 2.0 is hype, particularly a lot of what's going on in the UK is important and very, very useful, but the idea that citizens are going to, and civil society is going to burgeon into this amazing new power, I think is a bit exaggerated. And we've seen calls for voluntarism before to take over parts of what government was doing. Bush, this is the father, called for what he called 1,000 points of light. We were enamored of markets during the past 10, 15 years and went too far in that direction, at least in the U.S. Maybe we're going too far in some belief, naive belief in what people are calling self-organization. IT industry certainly has an interest in pushing social networking tools and getting big government contracts. This is the next new big wave of contracts in business. So they have an interest in hyping this. A lot of what gets done in policymaking is very complex. You can't just ask citizens what they think and come up with the entire policy answer. That's too easy. What if the wrong people are participating? What about representativeness? And do you just add up all the views, or do you need some form of integration, not just aggregation? So moving toward the future, we need civil servants who function as knowledge workers, who don't just carry out routines, but who are consciously thinking about how to make these routines and procedures work better. We need strategic use of digital tools, a strong sense of what it means to be in the public service. Governments might be run in some ways like a business, but they're not businesses. They have some strong differences. And we need experts who understand policy as well as efficiency. So with that, let me say thank you, and I guess we're open for questions. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Jane. It was really, really illuminating for a lot of questions. Well, before opening a round of questions and answers, I just want to, let's say, to resume in 7 points what we need to have a good e-government on place. First of all, we need infrastructure. Without PC or mobile access, nothing to do. We need broadband, and we need basically good broadband pricing for people to access in an easy way to the infrastructure of the information. Then, of course, we need the will of the government to open the services and make a very critical decision. Then we need a good attitude from the government servants, from the bureaucrats to serve, to do their job in a different way. Then we need the digital cultures. We need that citizens are able and ready to start to make this kind of relationship with governments from their houses, from the ubiquity society. Of course, we need a package of services, making our life as citizens easier and making it simple to our collaboration with the government. And this should be done to make not only a better world, but also to save a lot of money to taxpayers. Of course, to introduce e-government. By the way, in this afternoon we had lunch with the presence of the Secretary of State, Francisco Ross, and he told us that he met last week the CIO and the CTO of Obama, these guys that you were putting there, and he was very proud of this and said, we are working together, etc. And I was discovering that the government is doing things, really. Then to put very briefly advantages and risks, the advantage is, for example, the Denmark case. Denmark is a tiny country of 5.3 million people in the north of Europe, as all of you know. They introduced massively electronic invoicing. Electronic invoicing saved to the businesses, to the companies, 50 million euros per year, and to the government, and of course to the taxpayers, between 50 and 150 million euros per year, depending what you include in the package. If we should translate this to the European Union, this should mean between 15 and 25 billion euros of savings to taxpayers per year. So there's a lot of advantages if we introduce good e-government into our society. Of course, we have risks. We have risks because, as we taught in our lunch, when the Industrial Revolution started, immediately workers became afraid that if this new engine, these new machines should be put into the manufacturing plants, they should lose their jobs. But fortunately, only horses loses their jobs. So the big risk for any government, for any politicians, is what I do with this 3.4 million of bureaucrats that today serves my citizens from their offices. So it is not easy to put in an e-government society. I'm putting myself into the place of the politicians, and it is not an easy solution. But this is the future. There is nothing objection about this. So with this brief introduction, we are sharp on time. I open a round of questions. You just ask for your turn, and I will be very happy to give you the word. If Jane will sleep, I will try to shake her. And let's try to finish at 8 o'clock. So, when will start?
Carlos.
Over there, please.
I don't think it's necessary because everyone.
Then,
Carlos, espera un segundito.
2 y 3. 4, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4 y 5.
Hi, good afternoon, Jane. Thanks for the great speech you gave us. I think it was enlightening, and it gave us a very nice overview of the different options and things that has been done in the U.S. My question is twofold. I think what you did not tell us, and I'm sure you have an answer, particularly after a year, I really would like to understand more the results of all these efforts, and what were some of the measures of success that you had. I mean, when all these initiatives were launched, I'm sure that you have some measures, what were your plans around it? And I really would like to understand if those have been achieved or are in the process of being achieved, and some of the key results that you got in terms of whether it could be usage, savings, etc. That's one question. And the second question that I'm very interested on as we move towards a much more digital age is what sort of measures are you taking from a cyber attack standpoint? I mean, as that is a very big risk, and I'm sure that there are a lot of people out there that really would like to put things belly up in the US. Thank you.
Okay. In terms of the Obama administration open government initiative, so it's been running for about a year. We don't really have data from that yet in terms of cost savings. And if you thought about measurement, you can imagine that this would be a little bit tricky to measure. How would you measure, new ideas coming to the government from people and their value? And you could pick out anecdotes, you could pick out stories and show how much was saved because a farmer in Iowa, sent some information to the government. But it would be hard to do a systematic analysis.
It's more, I'm sure when you started this, you had some sort of expectation in terms of how many people at least were going to use it, or did you not, or was there not really a plan in that regard? It was something completely new, and you did not set yourself some sort of targets. I mean, it's...
Yeah, for
It's not savings, as it's too early, but at least other sort of metrics, as maybe idea generation, or usage, time spent on the sites, I don't know, whatever other measures you may have.
For the Open Government Initiative, the transparency, collaboration, participation, there were expectations of cost savings, but nothing measured, and no measures anticipated or defined. I think the idea was more normative, that people should collaborate, that people should participate, that this would be good for government. Even if it didn't save any money at all. We should do it because the government should be open and there should be more of an interaction with citizens. If we go back to these cross-agency initiatives and this enterprise view of the government, this began as an explicit attempt to drive down the, we call it O&M, operations and maintenance costs for information systems, because they were completely out of control and unsustainable. We have 26 or more different agencies. I have a slide, I must have hidden it, showing the rising cost of IT. People talk about the savings from IT. There's also, obviously the cost of IT, not only building but maintaining systems where the versions are always changing, they're always being updated, upgraded. There is legislation in place to try to control some of this. All the IT spending has to be tied to strategic plans. Every agency has to have a strategic plan. IT investments have to be aligned and justified on that basis. But that was still done agency by agency. So you could still have 10 different agencies essentially buying the same system and using it independently just because they wanted to, and that's the way we always did it. I know that we drove down O&M costs as a result of this. I didn't bring those numbers with me, but I can assure you that kind of exercise would be economically not only viable but very desirable. Different governments are in different stages. Imagine a government where you don't have loads of agencies that have been building fairly elaborated IT systems since the early 1990s. getting rid of that redundancy might not be the problem. Maybe for some governments, just getting these systems started should be the goal at this point in time. So you have to figure out where a government is, where a country is, and then go from there. I've been tracking this in the U.S. federal government and other governments to a lesser extent since the late 80s, and it's stunning how few actual performance targets or outcome targets there are. When the Clinton-Gore administration started customer service, for example, that you would increase service to citizens, every agency would survey citizens, take that feedback to start changing their processes. There were no cost figures. I mean, at that time we had a surplus, so we didn't care about saving money. We cared about service, and that changed very, very quickly. During the Bush administration, very few, no targets. I mean, in this sense, the UK and some other governments are far ahead of the US, maybe because they had to be economically. They didn't have the luxury of just spending money without thinking about it. Even during the Bush administration, the idea was to have better management, but not specific targets.
Well, Carlos is the director of our global MBA. I would like if you present yourself while making your question. We have a lady here who wants to take the microphone.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for your talk. I enjoyed it a lot. I hope you didn't mind that I took pictures of the presentation and yourself. It's for studying it later more detailing. I have 3 questions for you. On the Open Government Initiative, do the changes just apply to the federal government, or do the federal government has the power to make also the states to make changes towards more simplicity? My second question is regards data openness, and I would like to know if data openness is making more easier for the Republicans to make opposition to the party, to Obama party. And you talk also about the difficulties regarding citizens' contributions to change. I wonder if, in order to aggregate and interpret and analyze all this information, are you using any visual thinking tools widely that are of interest for us to know? Thank you very much.
Great questions. In the U.S., there's very little that the federal government can compel the states to do, so they would never even dream of saying. They might in a hortatory way say, we are launching the Open Government Initiative at the federal level, and wouldn't it be wonderful if state governments would do this as well? But that would be as far as it could go. So there's no way to compel them unless they use some budgetary tool. If we'll give you this grant if you make your government more open. It turns out that lots of state governments are doing this anyway. Why? Because they can. We already have a lot of this information that could be on the web, and if it's not, it's already in Excel files or in files that can easily be made available, including the geocoded data. Yes, having more data helps your opposition. Having all your speeches on YouTube so that anyone can go back and see them and replay them and edit them in all sorts of ways. Yes, so the information, serves many purposes. We are not using visual tools, but they are becoming more and more helpful and popular. I am sure that they used social networking maps and graphs and would continue to do that. And there are, as I think you probably know, a number of other tools that could be used as well.
Thank you. Please present yourself, please.
Gracias. Hello, I'm Carlos Hidalgo. And, I have a couple of questions that are more simple than the ones that have been presented. One of them is the impact of this on government. Government in the eyes of the average citizen. Has it made the average citizen feel, unlike before, that government, especially civil servants, are more or just as efficient or as effective as the private sector, bankers? Not bankers, because bankers are at the worst ebb of the situation nowadays. Now, the other question is the impact of all of this in regards to the educational system. This is a perfect case, and we are discussing it now in the academic world, the impact of the practical events spontaneously, by the way, into the academic world. Will it spur more research? And thanks again for the presentation.
My pleasure. My pleasure. You asked about the spontaneity of the response during the election. It wasn't clear through the spring. For a long time, a lot of us thought that Hillary Clinton would be the nominee. I mean, it's easy, after the election and the enthusiasm that people still have for Obama, to work all the way back and go through this election, this campaign month by month. And then I don't know what you heard in Spain, what the perceptions were after the Republican convention when Sarah Palin gave her first speech. Actually, if you looked at the numbers, and I'm sure you could still go back and find them, you watched this tightening of the race. And if those lines had continued to move with the same slopes, he would not have won. Of course, some things happened to Sarah Palin. She kept talking, fortunately. And we had the economic crisis. So a number of things are happening in the fall. So in terms of spontaneity, this was an interesting race, like I think probably most races are. One of the things I didn't mention was that in the U.S. we have a problem with what we call the youth vote. The youth don't vote. That's the problem. So if you have a candidate, and we can go back, Eugene McCarthy, Howard Dean, Robert Kennedy, the youth might be very enthusiastic. They might have great affection for the candidate, but they don't make the connection that they actually have to go and vote. So one of the things that these tools did they were intended to mobilize young people. Obviously, Facebook, as well as other social networking tools, were there, not exclusively, but primarily oriented toward young people. This is very carefully measured. We know exactly how many 18 to 24-year-olds there are. We know who's Republican, who's Democrat, who's independent. We know where they are. We know how to find them. And so you target these different groups and go and mobilize them. We're finding now the election's over. So where are the young people who were engaged in the campaign? Part of the thinking about this transition into governance was to keep them mobilized, keep them, they got excited about government, they got excited about politics and public affairs. But there wasn't a clear plan for what to do with that after the election. We still, those of us who signed up for this stuff get emails once a week from our president in our email box. It's a bit strange for me, quite frankly, and I talk about this with colleagues, and some of us feel that your president shouldn't be sending you emails. I mean, we know that Barack Obama does not sit down and send these emails to us, but it's maybe you want some distance from the White House to the people. we're getting emails from Joe Biden, from Michelle Obama, etc. So I think a lot of this is quite experimental. As far as civil servants being perceived more like people in business, yes, there is a lot of that. In fact, there is a specific claim or contention, again, not formalized or measured, that why shouldn't citizens have the same quality or ease of transactions with their government that they have with firms that they might deal with? If you can fill out a form online to get something done, if you can use a credit card online to get something done, why can't you do that with your government? So it's not true in all instances, but certainly you would expect roughly equivalent levels of service. When people have to stand in line or do things on paper that could easily be done online or by telephone or in a simpler way, they start to think, my government is inept. My government doesn't know how to manage itself in an effective way. Why should I trust this government? They can't even handle routine transactions effectively. So there is some argument for raising those levels. Your last point, I'll try to be quick, was about the education system. Political science is a very interesting area because you could read lots of journals in political science and you would never even know that there was an internet. The disciplines have a way of buffering themselves from what goes on in the world, at least in my country. Public policy is a little bit different. There is a group, political scientists, IT and politics group, that studies this explicitly. So yes, it's a whole new area, not only for campaigns, but for governing at all levels, for public administration. And we need a lot of empirical research, systematic evaluations, cost-benefit analyses, case studies. It's a very new area and a quite important area.
Carlos, are you satisfied? Because this afternoon you are our customers. This afternoon, all of you are our customers. Great. Thank you so much. Next question is for Joan.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mrs. Fontaine. Two questions. First of all, I want to ask you if the important is the strategy or the tools in the campaign, because about the campaign of Mr. Obama, many people is talking about the tools, but I think all these tools without a clear strategy maybe is not very useful to have to win, no? And I think also there were different people with different ages in different levels of this campaign, because to organize all these tools maybe it's also necessary to have a very important group of young professionals to organize this, because the problem is that maybe the old people can work in strategy, but it's very difficult for many people because natural situation of age, no, to control all these new tools like Facebook or Twitter and others. And another question I think is important is the question of the e-government. This is an information also for Mr. Fontanini. The Ministry of Economy has announced that we will have only one new officer for 10 retired. And of course the administration will be not very big in the future, and for this question I think e-government is especially necessary. But not only, I think there are three elements. This one, because we will need, of course, to save money for the future in the public administration. Second one, I think, is very important also for business, because I think this e-government can have a very good impact in economy for the recovery. And I think, and third element is, of course, we will have a better democracy. And I think these three elements are very important for this e-government. Thank you very much.
A pleasure.
Jane, maybe you haven't understood, but he is part of the government.
Okay. No, these are great questions. I try to make it clear, and I'll reinforce the combination of sort of traditional, careful management of a campaign. Again, where you have a map, neighborhood by neighborhood, you know where you're going to go, you know why you're having certain events in certain places, you're getting feedbacks, you're doing polling on attitudes frequently and in different areas. It really is the combination of this with the tools. And the interesting thing, and a bit not contradictory, but it can be ambiguous for people. On the one hand, you're talking about empowering the people using these tools, the volunteers. They have a fair amount of freedom to do things that they want. At the same time, you have quick feedback going back to, yes, a very professional staff, so that they know what's going on. You don't just have millions of volunteers doing whatever they want, knocking on whatever doors they want, so that the same people are getting called 10 times. Okay, that happened anyway. But you're trying to deploy people, putting them on buses to go where you need them. So there's no magic here. In terms of the one new officer for 10 retired, we were talking at lunch, and that's probably the most decent, painless way to cut the numbers in the civil service. Certainly, things like data entry. Right now, I'm writing a case about an office in Alicante, Spain, but it's a European office, the Office of Harmonization for the Internal Market, OHIM. When people would file applications for trademarks, they would file on paper, they would come in on fax, people would have to enter all of this data in all the different languages, and the cost of that it was enormous. Just by eliminating that, by having people file things online, we call this co-production. So the user is doing the typing for you. And they're happy to do it because maybe things are more accurate and they need to write on a piece of paper anyway. So let them type it in once, and you don't need to keep entering that information over and over again. Getting rid of those kinds of routine things can save a lot of money, and it will mean that those people would have to be redeployed, retrained, or retired.
Are you happy? Alberto, please.
Thanks. Well, my name is Alberto Corsina. I'm a senior scientist at Spain's National Research Council. And I've got a question about the idea of government, because I thought your talk was very good at sort of giving us a picture of how government can use these tools to be better at what it does. But I also think that these tools are changing in the idea of governance itself. So, for instance, the numbers of people that visited YouTube, probably a good portion of those numbers came from outside the US. So comparing TV viewers with YouTube viewers is a misleading, provides a misleading comparison. And it also provokes a thought of where do you set the limits and reach of how you understand governance. Because I think the digital revolution, if we want to call it like that, it offers us, it could simply be a new way of understanding what government means and what how to reproduce the state apparatus in a new idiom, the idiom of sort of digitalization. But it can also offer us a new topology of how we understand governance and where do we want to see the political purchase of participation. So my question is, can you give us some indication of research maybe along those lines, along the lines not of how the digital revolution is simply replicating maybe the traditional understanding of government, but how the digital revolution might be changing the very topology of what it means to govern a community, a collectivity, etc. Thanks.
This is an excellent question because part of the field of e-government, especially in public administration, has so focused on service delivery and efficiencies in service delivery that can miss the far more important point about the meaning of governance and the definition of governance itself. I think there are positive points to make here, as well as some quite frightening points, right? So having a government that can have tremendous surveillance and tracking abilities through cameras, through having people email their government, all of that can be kept. So what if you write very negative, critical information about your government? Maybe we're assuming here a benign, positive, productive government. What about an authoritarian government? Things would work completely differently, right? No one would want this kind of openness, and no one would put their views out there because it would be very dangerous. And so we find bloggers in Iran being imprisoned, bloggers in China being imprisoned, YouTube not used at all, outlawed in Turkey because they think that independence movements would use it for powerful mobilization, and they're probably right, they would. So if we restrict ourselves to, fairly well-functioning democracies, we have quite a different picture of changing the meaning of governance than if we open up our view of governments to the entire world. On the positive side, it's certainly, I think, a big change to be able to sit at your laptop, open up the entire budget for your government, search on something like IT, and I was actually just noodling around one day and was very surprised. Search on IT, and then rank by size all the IT contracts in the government, or sort by contractor, or let me see what contracts Boeing has with my government, and just these simple queries. And you can find out an enormous amount of information, and most people, certainly college-educated people, would be able to do that. I think that level of information about not just budget but all sorts of things has not only an impact on search but an impact on how we think of governance. I frankly don't know. In the U.S., what will happen with deliberation? We're not very good at deliberation in the U.S. We're not very deliberative. I think that online participation in Europe has been far ahead. And so examples there from, say, the Netherlands or Scandinavian countries, maybe even Canada, would be much better benchmarks or guides than anything we're doing in the U.S. People just want to vote and, get it over with in the United States. We don't deliberate much about government. And if you look at a lot of the commentary online, a lot of it, frankly, is appalling in terms of the quality and the amount of screeching that people are doing rather than deliberating. Privacy is an issue we haven't mentioned. That's hugely important. We haven't mentioned data security or cyber war. This is very U.S.-centric. The U.S. government, in our State Department specifically, seems to have jumped into what looks to me like a foreign policy mess in trying to deal with China about what... We know they came from China. We are not saying whether they came from the Chinese government, but very deep, serious attacks on about 30 firms, most in the Silicon Valley, some of which began about 2 years ago, but were undetected because these were very stealthy. I find it remarkable that the articles coming out are saying this is an entirely new kind of cyber war, completely unexpected, unprecedented. I mean, why was it unexpected? It should have been expected. It seems like a perfectly logical thing to do, to try to gather information or to undermine a country that I don't know, you may have some issues with. Those are areas of government that are changing as well.
One of the very interesting challenges to the emerging idea of governance is that, so for instance, open data surely is very useful for US citizens, but you could almost, you can count with some, a Spanish citizen accessing the open data US website and trying to produce him or herself new interpretations. I mean, and so certainly that data is not only of use or instrumental use to U.S. citizens, and therefore of political empowerment to U.S. citizens. But it can't, political empowerment might come from outside the U.S. territory, in the sense that being open data is open on a global scale. So those are the kind of challenges in a positive way. I don't mean to be derogatory as to what the digital term can do. But on the contrary, I'm just how the challenge to governance is a challenge because political implications can come from pretty much anywhere in the world.
Thank you for the redirection and the clarification. And your point opens up as well the possibility for people benchmarking their government against other governments, right? What are we spending on? Health services. Let me find a few other governments that are roughly similar to mine. What are they spending? Why? How can they do it so cheaply? And it looks like their healthcare system is better. I think that would be fascinating. Maybe you do that in Europe. Certainly analysts do it. But for more of the population, people interested in these issues, to do that would be a major change.
Alberto, are you happy? Good. Pau? By the way, excuse me, Pau. We should stop now, but I think there is a lot of interest here. Do you mind?
No, I don't.
Your jet lag is still over there?
It's non-existent.
Pau, please.
So I am developer in Spain for e-service for administration, different ministers in Spain. So I miss in your talk speak about technology, the real technology, because you use the social media to help Obama. It's fine, but I miss experimental or maybe a specific project to create a tool that make the real revolution. And it is for me the electronic vote, but not it's 4 years. Each day or maybe each month, yeah. And in this way, maybe in USA you can start creating a small village that practice the authentic e-government. And the other aspect that interests me is the security. You have spoke a little bit, but there are a big problem. This is the digital identity. And when the people participate with no standards, with a lot of social media cool tools, but you don't have any auditing of the process and no measurements, what do you think about the future, about the electronic vote, and what do you think about the security in the participation of the citizens?
I'll answer your second question first. I mean, you're absolutely right. If you look at comments or input or just asking, for example, in that White House website, what do you think? Tell us your priorities. You have no idea who's answering. They didn't ask people to identify themselves or to authenticate themselves in any way because you just want ideas coming in. But this could easily be manipulated. So it's a bit naive, and It's as old as the internet. The idea that people would just share and collaborate, and goodwill would triumph over evil intentions. But politics can be a dirty game, and people can play very hard. So introducing this quite benevolent, open space into the world of hardcore politics leaves one open. It would be, on the other hand, if you ask people to authenticate so that you knew exactly and you could be sure you knew who was speaking, there might be people who don't want to identify themselves for one reason or another. So it wouldn't be quite the open standard, but certainly it has to be worked out. Because right now it's very clear that people are trying to manipulate perceptions online by having people flood comments, and you now mobilize people to go onto these sites and to sort of, take them over by having hundreds of advocates for something add their voice. And if you don't know who they are, you have no, everything is anonymous. So that's problematic. In terms of e-voting, there are different meanings of e-voting. We don't have online voting from home or from your laptop. We have e-voting in the sense that you go to a voting place and things are calculated electronically. And we're not using e-voting for lots of policy issues where you might just get a sense. I mean, we do surveys. I know that some people think that there should be just a lot more e-voting, and then people would express their views and you would decide what to do that way. There are reasons why we have representatives work out some areas rather than making everything subject to a vote. So I think we would want to be very sure that whatever the issue or the problem or the area is something that is handled well by voting rather than by some other kind of integrative process. So voting is fine if aggregation is what you need, but aggregation is not always the best way to come to a decision. So we don't want to vote on everything.
Pau, you are not happy.
Not completely. I am technical.
So please shoot directly to the heart. Okay, you are available to do that.
You have a point of view humanistic, yeah? And I have a point of view technical. It's like, I know that to decide something in government, the best way is choose between two choices. But the e-vote could represent a real, authentic revolution, a new world, because the citizens participate directly, not each 4 years, each day in his life and in his decisions. Probably not in the big decision about the country, but in his neighborhood, or I don't know. You follow me, yeah?
Yes. Yes.
We follow you perfectly, my friend.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
To be happy, could you give me amount of years? I mean, now the people that born for me are digital native people. Yeah. So in 20 years, probably it's obviously that nobody will have problems with computers or internet. So do you think that in 20 years maybe the e-vote will be a real solution? Or do you think that is not the way because it's only for a small part of government?
So you're thinking that maybe on a weekly basis, citizens would be voting on all sorts of things at the level of their town, at the level of their state, at the level of their federal government, and the government would just put out questions. Should we put the park here or should we put the park there? Please send us your vote. Is that what you're imagining?
Yeah, and I know the problems. The problem is when the people don't want. Yeah, the people is more happy like Homer with a beer and seeing TV. But that is the way. During this way, your actual work is the fine way. Yeah, start to participate, to create. Really, you use a mashup. Yeah, you take all that you want. Okay, hello, Obama. But you don't create nothing specific, and you work for a national center, you know? I mean, it's sure that in USA you have more than 1 million persons that can work in this way that I imagine. So I am happy.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Paul. You are very generous, really. Joaquin?
Thanks very much for your nice speech.
Microphone.
Thanks very much for your nice speech, Professor Fontaine. I'm one of the two vice-deans of the school, and you have talked about the Open Government Directive on transparency, participation, and collaboration in government. You have talked about brainstorming, discussing, drafting, etc. You have talked about public participation, but I am a little more pessimistic about participation. I think that all large-scale multi-user communities and all online social networks that rely on users to contribute, to generate content, share one property. Most users don't participate.
Right.
They simply lurk around, in the background, but don't generate anything. This phenomenon is the participation inequality, and first studied in depth by Wildhill and Jacob Nielsen, and they talk about just 1% of people generate actively content, just 1%. So the question for me is how to overcome participation inequality and how to encourage users or citizens to contribute or to engage more.
I'm very glad you raised this point, and I'll add to the references a very fine book by Matthew Hindman, Hindman, that came out in 2009 called The Myth of Digital Governance. And he has a very good empirical analysis about, first of all, if you look at internet and web use, a very minuscule amount of that is for political information, political discussion. Most of when people go online, they're doing everything but political action. Bloggers as well. He finds empirically the blogs that are read tend to be the blogs of elites, of professional writers, they're not the blogs that some person just started to voice their opinions. And so in a very wide, complete variety of empirical evidence, findings like yours, and we've known this, and I actually agree with you. I don't think people don't participate because they're lazy. I think people don't participate because participation is costly, to just use an economic. It takes great effort, many policy problems, and it's a reason why I'm not in favor of lots of e-voting. Many issues, you have to do your homework. It's not obvious what the right answer is. I find this myself in a number of political issues. So how in the world could we think that every person who has the ability to vote would make a better process if they were all voting? First of all, they wouldn't vote, and if they did, we might not like the results. We have in Western Europe and the United States, several hundred years of representative government, and the reason we have representatives is because, number one, we value representativeness. So we come up with different rules for trying to make people who are elected representative of the people, of regions. And second, because we say, go to it, guys. We want you to spend all your time and make your best effort to work on our behalf. So How do we get more people to participate? I think you need to give more people more time. And I don't see how you can reduce the costs of developing knowledge. Someone asked about knowledge, of becoming knowledgeable. And I don't know, should I say it? I mean, I think the simple fact is that most people are not so interested. I mean, they want their life to work well, they want their government to work well, but they don't want to spend hours and hours studying. Look at the range of issues, right? Healthcare, environment, transportation. Who can study and know all these things? You barely can read the paper to keep up. So maybe it was always a myth that the internet would lead to great participation and a whole new way of governing, and there are some deep changes, but I'm not sure it's going to be, these tremendously energetic civil society communities.
Fine.
I'm not unhappy. Yeah.
Good. I think there is some more questions over there. Carlos?
Just a comment about that.
Please, comment.
Thanks a million. Mark Twain said that about the typewriter, that the typewriter was going to change the whole world. The typewriter didn't change the whole world. The internet will not change the whole world. But let's be optimistic. And now, to end, let's make a happy ending and everything will end well. Thanks a million.
Pleasure.
Any more questions, guys? Oh, wow. Are we going to sleep here this night, I think? Lady first, please. Are you okay? Any more questions? Ready?
Hi, Jenny. Thanks for being here. I would like to thank also Eduardo and Antonio for organizing this. My name is Eva, and I am the director of several postgraduate masters here in the school, one of them being the International Masters in Sustainable Development and Corporate Social Responsibility. And although I really know you're more public administration focused, but maybe you would like to give us your opinion about the private sector. After these great results of the Obama campaign, how about the big multinationals? Because I guess the SMEs will follow up. But how about the big companies using these type of tools to speed up a little bit the stakeholders' engagement in terms of performance? Could we talk already about, even if we are talking about e-government, could we talk about stakeholders' engagement 2.0? Could we talk about e-CSR? Do you think this is possible? Do you think companies are still reluctant to open the floodgates because they think transparency would bring more risks rather than opportunities? What is your opinion on this? Thank you.
I think you have a range of possibilities, and there are plenty of companies that really, at a very fine-grained level, develop online and social networking opportunities and spaces to learn more from their customers about their experiences. What they'll do with that information, is a different question. So yes, there are certainly social networking opportunities at the boundary between the firm and the customer, but also internally, right? For people who are geographically dispersed to be able to work better together. I'm sure that many of you are now using all sorts of file sharing, mesh systems. I'm in so many different groups with so many different passwords, using so many different group interfaces to make my life easier. And they do, but we have this explosion of tools and apps that people are using. So the opportunities are both inside the firms or with partner firms, as well as across the boundary to the customer. I think we all know now from several years of customer service experience that some firms say they're interested in customer service, but they're not. They're interested in customer manipulation or fooling the customer, not serving the customer. But usually firms over the long run that are successful are very good at listening to their customers, and these tools are quite powerful for that purpose.
Good. Last question. Over there.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Mario Peñas. I'm a teacher here in the EOI. I only wanted to talk about a little bit about what he talked of a vote and participation. It's only to say that I think it's not so far away that of e-voting, because we are participating yes, in projects coming from lines of the European Union for participatory budgets and making platforms, electronic platforms, of course, for developing this way to make that participation. Also, I think it's as you have also said, we must begin for the little things to try to engage people to participate. And these participatory budgets projects are always beginning by the local administration, trying to engage people to first to participate in how to first to define which is the project my local administration must spend the money in, and then decide what to do with it, which one goes before the other one, and things like that. So this is here, and it's only to try to make him a little bit happier. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just respond to say I know some of these projects. I think there's a project in the UK called Us Now. Don Tapscott's a very big proponent of citizen-driven government. We are on this World Economic Forum Advisory Council together, and I agree with some of what he says. I think he's a little bit too optimistic about it, but I hope he's right. I hope he's right, and that one of the things that we haven't talked about that's important is the ability of these tools to help social movements and groups that haven't had a voice to be able to try to generate a voice. There are plenty of cases of non-use, but there are some excellent cases of use. The Zapatista movement in Mexico is one. The Saffron Revolution in, and now I'm getting tired, in, oh my goodness, I'm sure someone knows it. You should shout it out. In Burma, Myanmar is another. In many societies, and not just authoritarian societies, people are using these tools to mobilize, to get things done that they think are important. Maybe not to the extent that we think they should or that they could, but they are very effective tools for communication, coordination, and delivering voice.
The European Commission has some lines, one so-called e-party, to promote this type of projects of e-participation.
Good. I think that while dreaming as a Spanish, Italian, European citizenship, we have a further challenge here to create European e-government. Today, Europeans are free to move from one state to the other without showing their passports, and I foresee a future where which will have an European e-government where I can have my certification as an Italian while I stay in France and vice versa. Why not? Pau, why not? Huh? Why not? Why not? So let me thank you, especially everybody here, people from EOI, our students. There's a lady from the Ministry of Parity here who escaped from their class to be here. Thank you for being here. And I pass through the word to Eduardo for a formal closing of this act.
To finalize only, James, thank you for coming to the EOI. Thank you for sharing your time and for answering a lot of questions. So this is your house.
It's my pleasure.
Montarini, thank you for managing the conference, and everybody, thank you for stay with us. We appreciate your presence.
Thank you.